weighed down with doubt. Ever since Sophia had asked for time to think things through, her absence and quiet distance had loomed like a shadow over their home. But it wasn't just her absence that gnawed at him, it was the small, unusual details she left in her wake. She'd been visiting a new cafe she wouldn't stop mentioning, slipping away with a casual, distracted warmth that wasn't for him anymore. And that odd change in her mood, the light in her eyes dimming at home, while she wore an unfamiliar smile that hinted at some hidden secret. Daniel gripped the steering wheel as he finally decided to follow his suspicions. This wasn't the man he was, but after weeks of uncertainty, he needed answers. His car eased down the cafe's quiet street, and he spotted her through the glass. Sophia, at ease and laughing, a softness in her gaze he hadn't seen in months. She was with a man casually leaning in toward her, their hands grazing over untouched coffee cups. It wasn't the intimacy of lovers, but the comfort of a bond only two people could share. Daniel stayed in his car, his heart pounding, his mind racing through fragments of conversations and all the small betrayals he hadn't been willing to admit. The image seared into Daniel's mind a snapshot of warmth and ease that hadn't been his to share with her in a long time. Sophia's hand rested lightly on the table, her fingers grazing the edge of her cup, and her eyes sparkled as she leaned in to listen to the man sitting across from her. Daniel squinted, studying the stranger's face, his movements, the easy way he mirrored Sophia's gestures. A pang hit him, sharp and unnerving. This man was too comfortable, too assured in his closeness to her. He wasn't just a friend, and their connection wasn't the result of a mere friendly chat. He looked away, the cafe lights blurring as he tried to pull himself back from the brink of what this meant. But his hands tightened on the steering wheel, anchoring him. Why hadn't he been enough? He'd poured years into their marriage, prioritizing her needs, offering her space when she asked. Now he wondered if his patience had only left cracks in their relationship, ones she was filling with someone else's attention. A part of him wanted to barge in, confront them right there under the flickering lights and the low hum of jazz spilling from the cafe speakers. But he resisted, taking a deep breath, his mind churning with a different plan. Sophia didn't need another scene. She needed to feel the sting of his quiet recognition, the force of him knowing and her unraveling under his steady gaze. He would confront her, yes, but it would be on his terms. Daniel waited, his eyes locked on her, tracking every gesture. He watched her smile, her lips curving in a way that made his stomach lurch. She hadn't smiled at him like that in months. And the man across from her, how well did she know him? How long had this been going on? The thoughts looped endlessly, each one pulling him deeper into a hollow feeling he'd hoped he'd never know. A few minutes later, Sophia stood to leave, her face still lit with the warmth of laughter. The man stood too, and for a moment Daniel's heart tightened, fearing he'd see a touch or a kiss. But they parted without an embrace, a lingering gaze and a promise unspoken hanging between them as she turned to go. The man watched her leave, and Daniel saw something that made his blood run cold, a faint smile that stayed, as if he'd won something. Daniel pulled back from his vantage point, his hands finally loosening on the steering wheel. His mind raced ahead to later that night, the carefully chosen words he would say to her when she walked through the door, unsuspecting. He would offer her no accusations, just a knowing glance that he hoped would unnerve her, unmask the lie in her assurances of needing clarity. When Sophia stepped back into their home, he would be waiting, his tone quiet, controlled, the question seething beneath his words. Did you find the clarity you were looking for? He pictured her reaction, how her face might falter, her mask slipping just enough to reveal what he now knew beyond a shadow of doubt. Daniel waited in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a glass of untouched water. The minutes stretched on, each one scraping at his patience, fueling the fire simmering inside him. Finally, he heard the familiar click of the front door. Sophia stepped in, her heels echoing softly against the floor as she moved through the hallway. He didn't call out to her. Instead, he waited until she appeared in the doorway, her casual smile flickering with surprise when she saw him waiting so still, in the dim light of the kitchen. Her hair was slightly tousled from the evening breeze, and she wore that same faint blush he had seen from the car, the lingering trace of her laughter. It stung. "Hey," she greeted, her voice breezy but tinged with a note of caution. "I didn't know you'd still be up." She stepped forward, but Daniel didn't move, his gaze fixed on her, unyielding. He returned her greeting with a slight nod, his expression unreadable. "Did you have a good evening?" he asked, his voice even betraying nothing. Sophia's eyes flickered, almost imperceptibly, before she gave him a small smile. "Yeah, I just went out to think, to clear my head. You know how it's been lately." She tried to sound casual, as if she were convincing herself more than him, and brushed a stray hair behind her ear. He waited, letting her fill the silence with more of her own words, the half-truths hanging between them like fragile glass. It's really helped taking some time to think things over," she added, her gaze shifting to avoid his, her fingers nervously adjusting the strap of her bag. Daniel watched her intently, feeling a dark satisfaction at her discomfort, and then he asked the question he'd rehearsed in his mind since leaving the cafe. "So," he began, his voice soft but edged with a weight that made her look up, her face paling slightly. "Did you find the clarity you were looking for?" The question landed with the precision of a knife. Her mouth opened, but for a moment no words came. He saw it, the brief, fleeting crack in her expression as her eyes widened, the controlled mask slipping. She caught herself quickly, forcing a small, shaky smile. "Yes," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I'm getting there." He nodded, holding her gaze without a trace of warmth. "Good," he replied, the word laced with a quiet intensity. "I hope it was worth it." Silence stretched between them, thick and tense. Sophia's face shifted, her forced smile faltering as she searched his eyes, trying to read him, to assess how much he knew. She opened her mouth again, an excuse forming on her lips, but he cut her off before she could begin. "Because I'd hate to think you were looking for clarity with someone else," he said softly, letting the words settle heavily into the quiet. Her eyes flashed with shock, and he knew he'd struck the nerve he had been aiming for. The color drained from her cheeks, and in that instant he saw the truth he had dreaded but expected. For a long, agonizing moment they stood facing each other, neither speaking. Then, without another word, he turned and walked past her, leaving her standing alone in the dim kitchen, her secret fully exposed in the silence he left behind. The silence between them that night lingered like a dense fog. Daniel lay awake, his mind racing as he replayed every detail from the cafe, every nuance of her reaction in the kitchen. Sophia had retreated to the bedroom without another word, her footsteps slow and unsure, as if she knew any further explanation would only cement her guilt. It was in that silence, in the hours that passed without sleep, that Daniel's thoughts began to harden, turning over his next steps with a cold, determined resolve. By morning he had a plan. He watched her carefully over the next few days, saying little, observing the subtle shifts in her behavior as she became aware of the distance he was purposefully placing between them. The routine words between them, simple exchanges of good morning and how was work, were brittle, hollow things now. Sophia's smile became forced, her gaze quick to flit away when he met her eyes. He could feel her anxiety building, see the guilt and confusion tightening around her like a noose. It was only a matter of time. When she finally spoke, it was tentative, her voice threaded with caution. "Daniel," she started, the way one might handle glass on the verge of shattering. "I feel like we haven't been ourselves lately. I think we need to talk." Daniel looked up, his expression calm, composed. He nodded slowly, crossing his arms, knowing she wasn't ready to confess and instead would try to spin another version of their reality. "Go ahead," he replied, his voice neutral, giving nothing away. She hesitated, biting her lip. "I know I've been distant," she admitted, looking down at her hands, "and I know asking for time to think, it must have been hard on you. I needed space." "Space?" he repeated, raising an eyebrow. His tone was soft but carried an edge. "And did you find what you were looking for in that space?" She blinked, her hands twisting in her lap as she seemed to search for a careful response. "Yes, I think so," she said, her voice wavering. "I realize that I haven't been fair to us. I just needed to clear my head." He nodded slowly, as if considering her words before leaning in, his gaze unflinching. "And I suppose clearing your head meant meeting someone else?" Sophia froze, her face paling. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction and her eyes betrayed her fear. "You know exactly what I'm talking about, Sophia," he said, his voice cold, leaving no room for pretense. "The cafe, the late nights, the sudden need for distance. You didn't want space. You wanted to replace what we had with something else." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. He watched as she struggled, the reality settling over her like a shroud. She looked away, her shoulders slumping under the weight of his words. For a moment she looked as though she might fight back, throw out some hastily crafted excuse. But she faltered, her expression crumbling into a mixture of shame and defeat. In that quiet, her betrayal lay fully exposed, both of them recognizing the finality of what had unraveled. A heavy, unbearable silence followed, stretching the space between them like a void neither could cross. Sophia's eyes were cast downward, her face an ashen mask of regret. Daniel held his gaze steady on her, unwilling to look away, wanting her to feel the full weight of his knowing. The last shred of pretense between them had fallen, and with it the remnants of whatever trust he had once believed unbreakable. Was it worth it? He finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper, but each word felt like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples through the tense quiet. Sophia flinched, her fingers twisting together, but still she couldn't meet his eyes. "Daniel, I never meant for things to get this way," she murmured, her voice thick with an emotion he couldn't tell was guilt or grief. "I was just lonely. I felt like we were drifting apart and I needed someone to talk to, someone who understood." He gave a short, bitter laugh, incredulous. "And you think I didn't feel the same way? You think I wasn't trying to understand you, to be there for you?" His voice, quiet but edged with hurt, grew sharper. "Instead, you went and gave the pieces of you I cherished most to a stranger." She looked up, her eyes wet, and finally held his gaze. "It wasn't meant to be a betrayal, Daniel. I just—" "No," he interrupted, his voice cutting through her words like a blade. "You don't get to paint this as some innocent mistake. You made a choice, Sophia, and every time you sat across from him, laughed with him, kept it hidden from me, you were choosing him over us." Her face crumpled, and a tear slipped down her cheek, but Daniel felt no sympathy. "Not now, not anymore. Maybe we can try to work through this," she said, her voice pleading. "I know I messed up and I know I hurt you, but I don't want to lose us, Daniel." A part of him, small and aching, wanted to believe her words, to cling to the familiarity of their life together, the memories they had built. But another part, cold and resolute, knew those memories had been tarnished beyond repair. He remembered the way she had smiled at the stranger in the cafe so easily, with a warmth that now felt like a betrayal seared into his mind. "No," he said, shaking his head slowly, decisively. "I won't live in a marriage built on lies. I won't be your safety net, the person you settle for when your secrets fall apart." She opened her mouth to protest, but he raised a hand, silencing her. "If you ever felt that you could love me the way I loved you, it's too late now. You took that from us." Her face broke, her lips quivering as she whispered his name, but he didn't let her speak again. He walked past her, each step a quiet, final act of leaving behind the pieces of their life she had shattered. The next few days passed in a blur for Daniel, as if he were moving through a fog of routines that felt hollow and unfamiliar. Sophia had packed a small bag and left, giving him space, though he knew it was only temporary. She had left with tears in her eyes, a mixture of regret and resignation, but he hadn't offered her comfort or words of parting. His silence had been his answer. As he wandered the empty house, their shared life together seemed to haunt every corner. The framed pictures, the small tokens of their time together, even the mundane items on the kitchen counter, all remnants of a life that now felt like an illusion. The air felt thicker, the quiet more oppressive, as if the walls themselves bore witness to their unraveling. And in that silence, Daniel's thoughts turned dark and simmering, a fury building beneath his calm exterior. A small, familiar notebook caught his eye one evening. It was Sophia's filled with notes, to-do lists, and reminders from their life together. He opened it with a pang of nostalgia, only to have his stomach twist when he saw, in the margin of one page, a scribbled name he didn't recognize. The handwriting was casual, almost careless, but the letters were seared into his mind as he read them. Lucas. So that was his name. The man in the cafe had a name, a reality beyond just being a stranger in a shadowy memory. Daniel felt his heart pound faster, a sharp clarity piercing through the numbness. This man was real, tangible, a part of Sophia's life that had stolen into his own. The name set something off in Daniel, a low burn turning into a blaze. He found himself consumed with thoughts of Lucas, who he was, how he had wormed his way into Sophia's affections, how he had dared to take the warmth that rightfully belonged to Daniel. Every unanswered question became a catalyst, feeding the simmering anger that Daniel had kept so carefully in check. Unable to stop himself, he reached for his phone and opened Sophia's social media. A quick search for the name, and there he was. Lucas. His face, casual and self-assured, stared back at Daniel through the screen. He seemed younger, polished, with an easy smile that grated against Daniel's nerves. It wasn't hard to imagine how Sophia had fallen under his spell. This man had taken something precious, something that Daniel had worked to protect and cherish for years. In a rash impulse, Daniel felt the need to confront him, to let him feel even a fraction of the torment that had been unleashed in his own life. But a small, detached voice within reminded him of what he stood to lose by acting on such impulses. This was his decision, his chance to end this with dignity or to let his anger consume him entirely. Instead, he closed his phone and leaned back, his chest heaving as he fought the urge to act. He realized that his next move would decide the end of everything they had built. The life they had known was over. What came next was up to him alone. As the days passed, Daniel found himself waking up in the small, hollow hours of the night, each time confronting a restless mind brimming with thoughts of betrayal and endings. He wandered through the empty rooms, the silence filled with memories both treasured and tainted, reminders of what he once believed was unbreakable. But the clarity he once sought was here, stark and undeniable. He knew now that any love he had held on to, any hope of returning to the life they'd built, had been shattered the moment he saw her laughing with another man. The life they'd known together was gone. Sophia had texted him sporadically since she left, brief messages that read like nervous apologies, hesitant but pleading, asking him if they could talk, if he'd be willing to hear her out. Daniel read each message without responding, letting her words go unanswered, keeping her in a silence as heavy as the betrayal she'd left him with. He found a bitter satisfaction in his silence, knowing she must have felt its weight with every passing hour. His lack of response was his first step toward reclaiming his dignity, an act of defiance against the betrayal she had brought into their lives. But one afternoon her number appeared on his phone, this time with a call. Daniel stared at the screen, a rush of anger tightening in his chest, but instead of declining, he answered, the silence stretching as he held the phone to his ear. Daniel? Her voice was soft, careful, as though she were testing the weight of each word before speaking. I need to talk to you. I know I hurt you, I know I. He cut her off, his voice cold. What do you want, Sophia? A small gasp escaped her, surprised by the sharpness in his tone. I just want to talk, to explain. Explain what? He interrupted. Explain how you sat across from him, laughing while you let our marriage fall apart. Explain how you hid this all from me? The words struck her like a slap, and he could hear the silence on the other end, her breath catching before she finally spoke. It wasn't what you think, she whispered, her voice cracking. I was lost, and he was just someone to talk to, someone who listened. Daniel's patience snapped, and that was worth destroying everything we had. No, she said, her voice trembling. I know I was wrong, Daniel. I know I should have come to you, but I didn't know how to bridge that gap. I didn't know how to fix what felt broken between us. You think you're the only one who felt that way? His tone was a mix of fury and disbelief. You think I didn't feel that distance too? But I never went looking for someone else. I never betrayed you. There was a long silence on her end, and he could hear her sniffle, the sound of her quiet, stifled sobs. For a fleeting moment he felt the old instinct to comfort her, to reach out and pull her close. But the moment passed, replaced by the cold reminder of her betrayal. Daniel, I don't want to lose you. I'm sorry. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I just want to come home. Please. The words hit him hard, reopening the wound he'd been trying to close. But something had shifted in him. He knew he couldn't return to the man who would have accepted her apology, would have let her back in. Home? He repeated, his voice hollow. Our home doesn't exist anymore, Sophia. You burned that down the moment you decided he was worth the risk. Her sobs grew louder, and she tried again. I'll do anything. I know I've broken everything, but please, I can make it right, I can. No, he replied, finality lacing his tone. You can't fix this. Some things can't be mended, and I'm done trying to pretend otherwise. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. He could almost picture her face, the look of shock and heartbreak that must be there, as she realized that he was truly done, that her words could no longer reach him. I hope you find the clarity you need, he said, his voice flat, leaving no room for debate. And with that, he ended the call, silencing her once and for all. In the weeks that followed, Daniel took steps to reclaim his life from the wreckage Sophia had left behind. He packed up her things, stacking the boxes by the door, each one a testament to the part of his life he was leaving behind. The divorce process, though swift, was filled with moments of stark realization as he signed away the years they'd spent together, reduced to legal documents and signatures. Friends and family who knew them both called and messaged, some expressing shock, others offering quiet condolences, though Daniel's responses remained curt, private. He didn't want their pity or advice. He needed only the clean slate, the finality of moving forward unburdened. One afternoon, as he loaded the last of Sophia's things into his car to drop them at her friend's place, he took one last look around the empty rooms that had once been filled with laughter, late-night conversations, and shared dreams. Now they felt lighter, the absence of her presence a strange relief. The end, he realized, had brought him a painful but necessary freedom. Though he had loved Sophia, he understood that clinging to the fragments of their marriage would only keep him tethered to a version of himself that no longer existed. With each passing day, the ache faded, replaced by a quiet resolve to build something new, something that belonged to him alone. As he drove away from the past they built together, Daniel felt a glimmer of something he hadn't expected to feel: hope. A new beginning was waiting, and this time he would be moving forward unburdened, ready to face a future that he, and only he, would decide.